Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Honestly, what the other speakers have already said has resonated with me so much. Of course, you've already gotten like a pretty good and comprehensive picture of the Philippines through Beatrice. But for me, when I'm talking about the specific challenges of climate justice in my country and my community, I never actually know where to start, because I feel like it's always such a big problem that's happening all at the same time, and it's so overwhelming. You can start from the part where there's a lack of awareness in climate education and climate crisis, considering that the Philippines is the fourth most dangerous country in the world, fourth most vulnerable country in the world to the climate crisis, and in the past 20 years has had the highest number of extreme weather events, yet our climate awareness isn't there. Like the way climate education is taught to us is as if it's about melting ice caps and polar bears. And it's so detached from the reality of what's actually happening in our country. It's so detached from the experiences that we have. It isn't contextualized to our experiences and to what we're seeing every day. And so when I was growing up, I was learning about climate change, but I didn't know that the typhoons I was seeing, the floods that we were experiencing in our communities was climate change. And the way that it was taught wasn't empowering at all. It was foreign and technical and very distant, as if it's a scientific fact to accept and not a problem and an injustice that we have to change. So I feel like that lack of awareness hinders people from being able to take action and to demand for greater change. Because if the way they teach us about climate change gets limited to reducing, reusing, and recycling and individual lifestyle change, we really won't be able to move forward in demanding for greater reparations and everything that we need to achieve climate justice. So I think that lack of awareness is already such a big difficulty. Now more and more people, through the help of activists and movements and people working on this, climate change awareness and the word climate change has become a little bit more mainstream, but there's still a lack of intrinsic understanding of what that really means for each community, for each Filipino, because even in ourselves, we don't know it, because we don't know what the best way to adapt is for all our communities. There are communities where, in order to save themselves from sea level rising and storm surges, it would be best to grow mangroves. There are some communities where that's not the case, and we don't know what would work for that community. So it's really this lack of research and development and support for our scientists and engineers also that plays into the climate crisis, that we're not able to adapt. Not really, not truly. It's always just band-aid solutions. Either we just keep making the soil higher and higher and higher and keep trying to block out the ocean as sea level rises, or we're just giving out relief operations every time there's a typhoon. And this is our national government speaking. And sometimes even nothing at all. And that's what we're really seeing now, that none of our leaders so far have really taken into account the climate crisis. None of the leaders so far have really taken into account, especially the most marginalized people, because who is the one that's most vulnerable to the climate crisis? They're the ones who are least responsible. Our small farmers, our small fisher folk, our indigenous peoples, our working class, who have barely contributed to this climate crisis. But when there's a typhoon, when there's a flood surge or a storm surge, who is most impacted? When there are droughts, whose livelihood is impacted? And so the challenge there in the climate justice movement and in our country is really making sure that when we have climate education and awareness, it's empowering and it's people-centered. We don't just listen to the science, but we also listen to the people. It's so important that we realize that, the world is going to shit and we need to do something about it, and we can do something about it. And I think that starts with empowering people with information and education. And then there's the other aspect of activism in general in the Philippines, where environmental defenders are in danger. The Philippines has been the most dangerous country in Asia for the past 8 years in terms of the number of slain environmental defenders. Just recently, a close friend of mine who was a volunteer teacher for indigenous peoples was killed and called a terrorist by the military. And that, even if the person or you who's just starting out as an activist aren't necessarily a threat yet, it scares everyone. It puts another barrier, another stigma into activism that, oh, if you are an activist, you're a terrorist. It's gotten so bad that it's gotten into jokes and into culture that even some of my friends will be like, oh, you've you're going to the mountains to join terrorists, right? And it seems like it's a part of culture and that it's normal, but that's the line of thinking that the government is actually using and pushing onto us to make sure that we can invalidate what activists are saying as this is something a terrorist is saying. And so that is just the storm that's brewing in the Philippines in terms of climate injustice, where, you know, all of it really just plays together. As Ate Beatrice already mentioned earlier, climate justice is intersectional and all the struggles are all interlinked, and our freedom and our liberation is interlinked with one another. It is all just one strand, one web of liberation that we're fighting for, and we need to make sure that we come together to do that. It's so important to realize that, you know, the climate crisis isn't just a problem of the future. It's something that's already happening today. We're not running out of time, quote unquote. We're already out of time because people are already drowning in floods in one part of the world, and on the other side of the world, just burning and dying of thirst. And the reason why isn't just because of the extreme weather events. The climate crisis, the crisis nature of the climate crisis comes from the part that the historical colonization and neo-colonization that's still happening today. It comes from the fact that the tip of a pen, we can't even produce this in our own country because we have not been permitted to develop by the global north colonizers, by this profit-oriented system, which thinks it's cheaper to just globalize the production of these things. So while we have all the minerals and the resources, we can't create this. So how are we expected to create renewable energy systems and solar panels if we don't have the intellectual property rights and the industries to be able to do this? And so we'll always be dependent on the global north countries and go into debt in the global north countries. And so it's so inspiring to see how young people across the world and in the Philippines are coming together to demand for change and empowering ourselves to make sure that we are demanding for reparations from the global north to the global south and from our leaders, making sure that we don't elect and put leaders who we know will just violate human rights even more. And it's a very scary time, especially now in the Philippines, because it is our election season and the son of our dictator from 1980s is running for president. And the daughter of the president now is running for vice president. And the combination of that is just so detrimental for the planet and for the people. And the fact that they even still have a platform just shows how deeply ingrained the injustices in our society, that we don't realize that human rights, that climate justice is something that it should be normal. We shouldn't have to be activists. We shouldn't have to be fighting for these things, yet we do. We are in a world and a system that was built to be unjust. And so we have to come together, as Ate Beatrice mentioned, in global solidarity, because that is the only way to solve this. And I know it can be so scary and difficult and full of anger and pain, and that can burn you out so fast. So I always make sure that my activism always comes from a place of love. Because I think love is how you win revolutions, because love is how you make sure that you hold people accountable. Love is how you make sure that you won't give up on someone just because it's difficult, because you want them to grow, because you know if they grow, the movement grows and you grow with them. Because again, our liberations are tied together, and the only way to defeat this injustice, to dismantle all systems of oppression, is by coming together in unity and in love. Thank you.